A billionaire CEO stood in front of 300 of the wealthiest people in the whole state and announced, out loud, in front of everyone, that she would only ever marry the man her little boy picked out for her. For 20 months, that vow had been perfectly safe. That was the entire point of saying it out loud. Her son hadn't spoken a full sentence to another human being in almost 2 years. He wasn't going to pick anybody. He couldn't. The vow was a locked vault, and everyone around her understood exactly what kind of vault it was, which is precisely why she'd built it. Then that silent 7-year-old climbed down off the stage on his own 2 feet, and he walked straight past a ballroom full of men in tailored tuxedos, past every polished, wealthy, perfectly available bachelor in that entire room, all the way to the back, to the service doors, to where the staff was standing quietly out of the way. And he reached up, and he took hold of my hand, the school bus driver's hand. The one man in that entire glittering room that not a single important person had bothered to look at all night. And 300 of the most powerful people in the state slowly turned around to stare at me. And what I did in the next 30 seconds is the one thing nobody in that ballroom saw coming. Least of all the boy's mother. But before I tell you what happened, do me a small favor. If you've ever been the one standing at the edge of the room that nobody important ever thought to notice, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel exists for people like us. Go on, I'll wait. Now let me back all the way up, because to understand why a silent little boy crossed an entire ballroom to find me, you first need to understand a very quiet kid, an empty chair at his family's table, and about 20 months of ordinary mornings on a school bus. My name is Owen Rhodes. I'm 40 years old, and I drive a school bus for a living. Route 8. Same 40-some kids, same stops, same stretch of county road, rain or shine or ice for the last 7 years running. It's not a job any child dreams of growing up to do, and it's certainly not a job that earns you a second glance at a fundraising gala full of donors. But I'll tell you something true that took me a long while to fully understand for myself. A school bus driver sees things. You're the first adult those kids lay eyes on every morning who isn't their own parent, and the last one they see in the afternoon before they walk back through their own front door. After enough years, you learn to read a whole day off a kid's face in the half-second it takes them to climb your steps. You see the ones who are loved, and God help you, you see the ones who aren't. You see who didn't eat breakfast and who didn't sleep and who's carrying something no 7-year-old ought to carry. 40 kids, twice a day, 7 years running. You see just about everything if you're willing to actually look. Most people never bother. That, right there, is really the whole story. Everything else is just detail. I'm a single dad. My daughter's name is Maya. She's 8, and she's the entire reason I took this route in the first place. The hours line up with hers, so I'm home when she's home, and I've never once missed a school play or a nightmare or a skinned knee. Her mother and I separated when Maya was small. No villain in that story, just 2 people who wanted different things. Her mom's a good woman, lives a few hours off now, and Maya splits her weeks between us. The weeks I have my girl are the best weeks there are, and I mean that with my whole chest. So that's me, in short. A man who drives a bus specifically so he can be present for his own kid, who sees 40 other people's children twice a day, and who made peace a long time ago with being completely invisible to anybody whose bank account had more zeros than his. Then, about 20 months ago, there was Milo. Milo Hart got added to my route on an ordinary rainy Tuesday, 7 years old, and he was, without any competition at all, the quietest child I'd ever had ride that bus. I want to be precise here, because it matters. It wasn't shy quiet. It wasn't well-behaved quiet. It was something heavier. A quiet that had settled onto that boy like a coat 2 sizes too big for him. A quiet he was carrying, not choosing. He'd climb my steps every morning without a single word, walk straight to his seat, second row back on the left, forehead nearly against the glass, and stare out that window for the entire ride. Every day, without fail. Like he was watching the road for something he already knew, somewhere deep down, was never coming back. I picked up his story the way bus drivers always do. Sideways, in pieces, from other parents at the stops, from the aides at school. Milo's father had died suddenly, an accident, back when Milo was 5. And Milo, who by every account had been a loud, funny, endlessly talkative kid before that day, had simply gone silent afterward, shut the door and locked it. The doctors had a clinical term for it, selective mutism, brought on by trauma. But I'll be honest, a phrase like that doesn't tell you one true thing about a 7-year-old boy staring out a bus window for a year and a half straight. His mother, from what I gathered, was somebody with real weight in the world. Money, power, the whole picture. She had every specialist and therapist that money could buy working around the clock on her silent son. None of it was moving the needle. Milo just kept staring out that window. Here's the one thing in this entire story that actually matters, so I need you to hear it clearly. I did not try to fix Milo, because everyone else in that boy's life was trying to fix him. The therapists, the tutors, his frightened mother. Every one of them came at that child with that anxious, hovering energy of please, sweetheart, just be okay, just say something, you're scaring us. And a kid feels that. He feels it in his bones. He feels every waking minute like he's a problem the grown-ups around him are desperate to solve. So I simply didn't do that. Every morning when Milo climbed my steps, I'd say, "Morning, Milo. Good to see you." That was it. Not, "How are you feeling today?" Not, "Are you going to talk for me?" Nothing that required him to produce an answer or perform a recovery. Just, "I see you. You exist. You matter to me. Go find your seat." And every afternoon, climbing back on to go home, I'd say, "There he is. Climb up, buddy." That was the whole extent of it. That's genuinely all I did for 20 months. I treated that silent boy like a regular kid because he was a regular kid carrying something far too heavy for him. Small things grew out of that slowly, the way real things always do. I noticed what Milo noticed out of that window, and the one thing that made him perk up, just barely, every single day, was an old paddock out past the Hendersons' place where a sway-backed gray horse named Duchess grazed close to the fence line. So I started easing off the gas right there, letting the bus roll slow past that paddock so Milo could get a good long look at her. I never said a word about it. I just slowed down. A few months into it, climbing down off the bus one afternoon, Milo stopped dead on the bottom step. He pointed back toward the paddock. He looked up at me. He didn't say anything, but there was a whole question sitting in that look. "You see her too? You slow down on purpose?" I said, easy as anything. "Yeah, good old girl, isn't she? I look for her every day, same as you." Milo nodded, one small, solemn nod. And that, right there, was the first time that boy and I ever truly talked to each other. Not one word spoken out loud. That's how it went from there. Slow months of it. The smallest, most patient building of a thing between one grieving boy and the bus driver who slowed down for a horse. He started saving up a wave from his porch every morning. He drew me a picture once. A yellow bus and a gray horse standing side by side, folded into a tiny square, and looked out the other window while I unfolded it, like he couldn't stand to watch me see it. I taped it to my visor that same afternoon. It's still there. He didn't say much out loud for a long, long time. But somewhere in those 20 months, on a school bus of all places, that boy quietly decided I was safe. That I was his. I want to be clear about one more thing, because it matters to everything after. I never once met Milo's mother in all that time. Drop-offs and pickups were handled by a nanny, a warm, quiet woman named Rosa, whom I'd come to know a little. I knew Milo came from serious money. You could read it easily enough in the quality of his clothes, the address of his stop, the full-time nanny, but I had no idea how much, and truthfully, it had never once crossed my mind to care. He wasn't a rich kid to me. He was just Milo, the boy who loved the horse past the Hendersons, which is exactly what makes what happened next so strange that I still shake my head over it. It was the district's annual charity benefit. Ordinarily, an event like that has nothing whatsoever to do with a man who drives a bus. But the district had started a tradition of inviting a handful of staff from each school, a few teachers, an 8 or 2, and, drawn by simple lottery, one bus driver, as a warm gesture celebrating the whole school family. My name got pulled that year. I very nearly skipped it. A glittering ballroom full of wealthy donors is just about my least favorite way to spend an evening, and I'd have had to find someone to watch Maya. But the principal made it sound like it genuinely mattered, so I rented the one and only suit I have ever rented in my life and went. My whole plan was to stand quietly near the back by the doors, eat one of those tiny impossible appetizers, smile at nobody in particular, and slip out the second it was polite to do so. What nobody had thought to mention to the bus driver was that the benefit's single largest donor that year, the woman whose name was printed across half the evening's program, the CEO whose company was funding the school district's entire new wing, was Camille Hart, Milo's mother. There was a great deal more I didn't know. I didn't know Camille Hart had spent the last 2 years as the target of something I can only describe, looking back, as a slow-motion siege. A young, brilliant, newly widowed billionaire is, it turns out, one of the most hunted people alive. Every ambitious man for 3 states around had been quietly circling her since her husband died. A particular kind of man. The kind who looks at a grieving woman with a fortune and a fatherless little boy and doesn't see a grieving woman at all, but an opportunity. They courted her. They maneuvered. Worst of all, they courted Milo, clumsily, obviously, with all the grace of a brick. They bought that silent boy expensive things he had no interest in. They tousled his hair and called him champ. They performed warmth loudly whenever his mother was watching and ignored him completely the moment she wasn't. And Milo, who didn't speak but noticed everything, absolutely despised it. Of course he did. Children are the finest lie detectors God ever built. They can smell a performance across a room and never forget who was real with them. Camille. Worn down to nothing by the grief and the circling and the loneliness, had said a thing at some point, half in earnest, half just to make the suitors finally give up. She'd said it to her family, her board, even to the suitors themselves, until it hardened into settled fact. Camille Hart would not consider marrying again unless it was a man her son chose for himself. Her son. The boy who didn't speak. The boy who wanted nothing to do with any of them. It was, as everyone in her orbit perfectly understood, her elegant, unanswerable way of saying never. A locked door, with the key dropped in the ocean. Since the only person who could ever turn that lock had gone silent 2 years earlier, and showed no sign of turning it for anyone. So, picture that ballroom. Camille near the stage, gracious and composed, exhausted down to the bone underneath the gown and the smile, orbited all evening by exactly the kind of polished, eligible men I've described, each taking his turn beside her, each with one eye on her, and one eye on the silent boy pressed close to her leg, each one performing fatherliness at that child for his mother's benefit. And, at the far end of that enormous room, picture me, standing at the back by the service doors, holding a small plate of something unidentifiable, my rented collar too tight, quietly counting down the minutes until I could decently leave. And picture Milo, standing beside his mother in a room full of strangers who every one of them wanted something from her, watching man after man crouch to his level and aim a big fake smile his way, calling him buddy, little man, champ, that heavy, oversized coat of quiet sitting on his shoulders. 7 years old, in the middle of all of it, and completely alone. I didn't even know he was in the building until the whole room changed. You know the way a room sounds when something is suddenly happening in it, the hum of 300 conversations dropping at once, heads turning in a wave. I looked up from my sad little plate, and the entire ballroom had gone quiet, watching a small boy walk. Milo had stepped away from his mother, away from the stage, away from the circle of important men, and was walking entirely on his own, in a straight, certain line, across that enormous polished floor, with 300 of the most powerful people in the state watching him do it. It took me an embarrassingly long few seconds to understand he was walking toward me. I actually turned to check who must be standing behind me. There was no one. Just me, the service doors, and a tray of dirty glasses. He walked the full length of that ballroom, past every millionaire in it, past every man who'd spent 2 years performing for his mother, and stopped directly in front of me. He tipped his head all the way back to look up, and he reached up his small hand, and he took mine. And then, in a clear, certain voice that most people in that room had quite simply never once heard him use, he said, "This is my friend." He sees Duchess with me. I have never felt anything before or since like what I felt in that 1 second, because I understood exactly what those 7 words had cost that boy. A year and a half of total silence, breaking open, in a room full of frightening strangers, for me, for the bus driver who slowed down for a horse and never asked for anything in return. I looked past the top of his head, and Camille Hart was standing a few feet away with both hands pressed over her mouth, tears pouring down her face in front of everyone, because she was hearing her son's voice out loud in public for the first time since the day her husband died. Into that ringing silence, with 300 powerful people holding their breath, somebody near the stage, meaning, well, I do believe, Lord help them, called out brightly enough to carry to every corner of the room. "Well, Camille, it looks like your son has finally chosen." The whole room laughed, warm and delighted right down to their shoes. And as one creature, 300 people turned to look at me, the rumpled bus driver in his rented suit, standing by the dirty glasses, holding a billionaire's son by the hand. And I understood, with a cold horror starting at my scalp and going straight to my feet, exactly what was happening. The vow. Everyone in that room knew about the vow, and her son had just, in the most public way possible, chosen me. Here's where I did the one thing nobody in that ballroom saw coming. Every man in that room, I have no doubt, would have grabbed it with both hands. A beautiful, brilliant, wealthy woman, a famous public vow, and a beloved child's open choice, all handed to you at once in front of 300 witnesses. You'd have to be a fool to fumble that. Instead, I let go of Milo's hand, gently, and I knelt all the way down to his eye level, my back turned to those hundreds of watching, smiling faces, so it was just him and me, the way it always was on the bus in the mornings. And I said quietly, just for him, "Milo, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen anybody do in my whole life. Thank you for telling everyone we're friends, because we are, and we're always going to be." Then I stood back up, looked Camille Hart in the eye, and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, because the whole room needed to hear it. "Ma'am, your boy is the finest kid on my whole route, and it's been an honor to be the man who drives his bus. But I need to say this plain, so everyone in here hears it. I'm not anybody's prize to be won, and this boy isn't a key to a lock. He didn't choose a husband for you tonight. He chose a friend for himself. That's all he did, and it's a pure, beautiful thing, and I won't let it get twisted into something else in front of him. I looked back down at Milo and smiled. Friends don't need a reason, partner, and they sure don't need a reward. I'll see you Monday. I'll slow down for Duchess. Then I picked my coat up off the chair, walked out of that ballroom, and drove home to my daughter. Because that boy had just done the bravest, purest thing I'd ever witnessed a human being do. Reach straight past an entire room of polished strangers to publicly claim the one adult who'd ever simply let him be who he was. I would sooner have stood there all night than let a crowd of glittering strangers turn that into a punchline about marrying his mother. He deserved better. His first words in 20 months deserved better. Now, I told you at the start this isn't a fairy tale, and I meant it. But what actually happened is better than any fairy tale could have written. Camille Hart found me 3 days later, not at a gala, not in some boardroom. She showed up on an ordinary Thursday afternoon and stood waiting at my bus stop on County Road 9, right near the Henderson's Paddock, dressed in plain jeans, no entourage, no driver. She waited patiently in the cold until I finished my route. When I stepped down, she didn't lead with the vow, or the money, or any of that noise. She led with this. Thank you for not taking the thing everyone in that room wanted you to take. Every other man alive would have. You're the first person in 2 years who looked at my son and didn't instantly see a way to use him to get to me. So we talked. Just talked. Standing by the side of an ordinary road, while an old gray horse watched us through the fence rails the whole time. She told me about her husband, the 2-year siege, how staggeringly alone a person can be in the middle of all that money. I told her about Maya, about Route 8, about learning to read a whole day off a child's face. We never once talked about the vow. We just talked like two tired single parents at a bus stop, which, stripped of everything else, is exactly what we both were. I want to be careful here, because this is the true heart of it, and I won't cheapen it. I didn't fall for Camille Hart because she was rich. God knows the money was nothing but a complication, a looming obstacle that kept me certain for months the wisest thing I could do was keep my distance entirely, because the last thing I wanted was to prove that laughing ballroom right about me. And she didn't fall for me because I was some noble, salt-of-the-earth poor man. She'd have seen through that instantly, and it would have disgusted us both. What actually happened was slower and quieter and realer than either of those things. Two people worn down to the bone by their own private griefs, slowly discovering they could just sit together and be two ordinary people with a quiet boy between them who had, in his own way, already chosen the both of us. Milo was the matchmaker, but not the way that Ballroom thought. He didn't choose me for his mother. He chose me for himself. And his mother, watching closely over the months that followed how a man treated her son when there was supposedly nothing in it for him, slowly chose me too. Entirely on her own, in her own time. We took it slow. Months and months, for Milo's sake more than our own. I would not let that boy attach himself to something that might still fall apart and break his heart all over again. We married a year later. Small ceremony, backyard, bright afternoon. Milo talked the entire day, start to finish. Turns out once that particular dam broke, he had a year and a half of saved up words waiting to pour out, and they haven't really stopped since. Maya was the flower girl, glowing. And there was a horse there too, of course. We'd gotten Milo one of his own by then, an old retired paddock horse nobody wanted, and he named her Birdie, after the little sparrows that used to land on Duchess's back. Here's the part I keep coming back to. Every person in that ballroom believed the story they watched that night was the lucky bus driver who got chosen by a billionaire's son and won the lottery. That was never the story. The real story is that a grieving boy spent 20 months of his short life silent because the entire world around him kept anxiously trying to fix him. And the one person who simply saw him instead, who just slowed the bus down for a horse and said good morning and meant it and asked for nothing back, turned out to be the one person on earth his battered little heart finally reached for, in a room full of people who looked far more impressive than I ever will. Children are the best lie detectors God ever made. Milo didn't reach past all those men by accident. He reached past every one of them because he'd spent 20 months with nothing to do but quietly watch them all perform. And he knew, the way only a child truly knows a thing, that not one of them had ever actually seen him. I had. That's the whole of it. That's the only thing I ever did that the rest of them didn't. I still drive Route 8 to this day. People ask why, since I don't need the paycheck anymore. But I think about the other kids climbing my steps every morning, everyone carrying something too heavy for their small shoulders. Most of them with somebody anxiously trying to fix them, and nowhere near enough people simply willing to see them. And I think this might just be the most important job I could possibly have. I get to say, good morning, good to see you, to 40 kids a day and mean every word, in that fragile half second before the world gets its hands on them for the day. Milo taught me that's not a small thing to give a child. I've come to believe it might be the biggest thing there is. There's a version of that gala night where I take the prize, smile, and step forward into the fairy tale 300 delighted people had already written for me. Maybe it even works out fine. But there's no version where I do that and still get to kneel down, look that brave boy in the eye, and know I protected the bravest thing he ever did from becoming a cheap joke about his mother. I chose the boy over the fairy tale. And in the end, the boy was how I got the whole family anyway. Funny how that works sometimes. The night of the gala itself, I got home and Maya was still up past bedtime, asking how the fancy party had been. I told her it had been something. She asked if anything interesting happened. I stood in our kitchen and thought about a silent boy crossing an entire ballroom floor by himself and said, "Yeah, baby. The bravest kid I know used his words tonight. Best thing I ever saw." She didn't understand what I meant, not then. She's got a stepbrother now who talks her ear off daily in a swayback old horse named Birdie. I think she understands it just fine these days. So let me ask you one thing before you go. An entire ballroom full of powerful people couldn't manage to see one bus driver standing right in front of them. And a silent 7-year-old crossed that whole enormous room past every one of them just to take his hand, because that driver turned out to be the one person who'd ever truly seen him and asked for nothing in return. Who is the person in your own life who saw you, really saw you, back when you felt invisible to everyone else? Have you ever told them what that meant? Tell me down in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd truly love to know. If this story reached you tonight, if you believe, the way I've come to believe right down to the ground, that the rarest thing one person can do for another is simply see them and ask for nothing back. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Drop a like so the next person can find their way here too, and leave your own story in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Trust me, it's a good one.